I've wanted to really just vomit out my complex and somewhat confusing thoughts on Xenoblade 3's story for a while now, and my god do I have a lot to say about this topic. Stick with me as I explain why, contradictory as it may sound, I believe that Xenoblade 3 has both the weakest story in terms of raw narrative, excluding X, and yet at the same time perhaps the best story in terms of underlying meaning and emotional impact of any game in the series. In terms of how I'm going to structure this video, I want to start by talking about the story as it plays out in chronological order, and this will take up the bulk of its runtime. First, the opening, which I would argue extends from the beginning to the end of Chapter 1, then what will likely be the longest section, the middle part of the game, which goes all the way from about this point to the end of Chapter 4 in my opinion, and then finally the conclusion, which, well, concludes the game, taking us up to Chapter 7's finale. I then want to discuss my thoughts on the story and its themes as a whole, covering specifically some of my criticisms in more detail, before ending with me explaining how this game's story would personally rank for me in comparison to the others in the series. I want to be clear though, this is not a review of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 as a video game, but as a narrative, so I will be completely avoiding talking about gameplay here unless it's explicitly relevant. Also, even though it's obvious, it would feel wrong if I didn't put a verbal spoiler warning here before we begun, so here you go. There are spoilers for the entirety of Xenoblade 3 as well as 1, 2, and even the Xenosaga series ahead. The Xenosaga spoilers specifically are very scant and are only present right at the end of the video so feel free to skip that specific section if you so desire. There are also very brief references to other pieces of media entirely unrelated to Xenoblade, like Black Mirror and Final Fantasy X. The former occurs at, and the latter in my discussion of the game's ending at, if you want to be extra safe. Also, I can already tell this video is going to be a behemoth, so settle down, make yourselves comfortable, get yourselves a snack, and be willing to watch it in multiple sittings, because I think I might end up giving this video a run for its money.
Persona fans, what the fuck?
Because this video will be divided into distinct standalone sections, you can skip between them using YouTube's chapter system. So if you, for example, want to skip me rambling about the individual events of the story for hours, and just want to get to my final thoughts, and I wouldn't blame you, feel free to skip to that section, or whichever one is calling out to you. With all that boring stuff out of the way, let's get to my review, or rather, my dissertation judging by this script's length, of Xenoblade Chronicles 3's story. The TLDR for my thoughts on Xenoblade 3's opening are the following. This is one of the most genuinely gripping, emotional, well-written and memorable first acts to any story I've ever experienced, and easily the best beginning to any story in the trilogy from my point of view, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. While you could view this particular game as having an unfair advantage, in that its opening simply takes up more time, a whole single chapter out of 7, whereas the openings for previous games took up less of their overall plot, I actually view this as a smart decision on the part of the writers, as it allows for more time, care and attention to be put into delivering explanations for the way the frankly brilliant twisted mechanics of this setting function, and for setting up our core cast of characters. Everything here, from the very beginning to the end of Noah and Mio's campfire heart-to-heart, is so unbelievably tightly written, well choreographed, perfectly orchestrated, Okay, I know I said I would only be discussing the story in this video, but when it's this good, I gotta talk about the music too. And well acted, but it genuinely had me in awe my first time experiencing it. This is not to say that the game is all downhill from this point, far from it, as its peak comes much later in the often discussed chapters 5 and 6, and just you wait till we get to that part. But in my opinion, this specific stretch is the most consistently well done section of the entire story, even if no individual moment within it achieves the narrative peaks later to come. Allow me to explain why. A ticking clock. I love the fact that this is the very first thing we learn and see, or rather hear about Aionios, that it is in some way connected to time. Before the game's release, the abundance of clock-based imagery alongside the seeming return of characters who should be dead had me a little concerned Monolith were going to integrate time travel into this story, and I'm thankful to say this wasn't the case. It's not that I would necessarily be averse to a story which used such a mechanic, but I just don't think it would fit the Xenoblade universe and wider story. It almost feels like a cop-out for writers to use when they're incapable of crafting genuinely interesting stories, which is something this series has never failed with, and what we have here is one hell of an interesting story. It rings true once again. We start with our Kavezi trio as young adolescents, carving a pathway through a dense city street towards the scene of the Queen's coronation. However, as they rush forward, something truly bizarre happens. Time ceases flowing around our protagonist, Noah. The birds hang motionless in the air. The water stops as if somehow instantly frozen to ice, and a mysterious other planet looms ominously overhead. A frozen moment in time. An endless now, if you will. All of this with no clear explanation for any of what is going on. This immediately presents a genuinely thought-provoking mystery that serves as a brilliant initial hook for the player. Why is time frozen? Why is there another planet seemingly about to crash into our own? But the game doesn't give you a moment to ponder these mysteries, immediately throwing you into a fast-paced battle scene between the two nations which make up this war-torn world, Keves and Agnes. An awesome hidden detail I want to bring up here, which I don't see acknowledged enough online, is what these names translate to. In Hebrew, Keves translates to lamb, with Agnes doing the same in Latin. This serves as a fantastic hidden clue that the fates of these two countries is to serve as mere sacrificial lambs for a mysterious higher power, pulling the strings. You could view this scene as also existing in order to subtly show the player all the things, all the aspects of regular life that will soon be foreign or entirely absent within Aionios. Large crowds of people of all different ages, laughing and just having fun, children playing, fireworks bursting, these are all things that could never exist in the world we're about to be shown. Aionios is a world immediately in contrast with the ones presented in the previous games, in that it is entirely defined by conflict. Sure, danger and threat existed in Bionis and Olrest. The former saw regular invasions by mechanical menaces known as Mechon, among various other antagonistic forces, and the latter was put under threat by the terrorist organisation Torna. However, the key difference between these two worlds and Aionios is that in neither were these threats representative of the entire world. Sure, danger existed, of course it did, but people were still able to lead relatively normal lives outside of that danger. They were born in the normal way, could grow up, fall in love, find their passions and imbue the world with them, even produce new life in their place and die naturally. That is to say, large aspects of these universes could exist independently of whatever the core problem at the heart of their respective story was. This is not the case with Aionios, to which all of this is completely foreign. The people here are born in cradles, which artificially grow them and then toss them out at 10 years old, to live a measly further 10 years doing nothing but fighting for their country until the day they die in their homecoming ceremony, a true honour which gives them the chance to finally return to their respective queen who graciously birthed them. Except, it's disgusting. Any sensible person can watch all of this and see how unbelievably fucked up it frankly is. But the thing is, our characters are none the wiser. Having grown up in this world and never being shown the alternative, what life is truly supposed to be like, for them it's normal. People even crave their homecoming, despite how obvious its true barbaric nature as a form of pseudo-suicide is for us. This drastic example of dramatic irony, in which the player is made readily aware of how simply wrong the world is, and yet the characters they watch are none the wiser, is pervasive to the game's entire narrative, creating a truly unique and memorable kind of story. Never in any other story have I seen just real, normal life, people possessing individuality, the freedom to fall in love, have children, experience things, experience anything outside of constantly fighting, glorified and cherished in such a manner, and I think that's something which is genuinely beautiful. It genuinely made me appreciate the basic facets of my own life that I take for granted. The contrast between the depraved, abhorrent state these poor victims find themselves in, and the one we know they could and should have, is almost laughably extreme, but it just makes it all the more satisfying when they finally uncover all this for themselves, but more on that much later. As if the fate of an Ionian citizen wasn't bad enough, it's made even worse due to the existence of flame clocks. These are simply a really cool novel sci-fi concept that Xenoblade is so excellent at creating, and the other amazing one that comes to mind are Blaze from the second game. One of the things I love about this series is how they'll come up with an interesting concept like this, and really extensively operate the ramifications it has on the world. This rings true once again in Ionios, with the existence of flame clocks completely defining how the world operates on a fundamental level. They are what ensure the world is perpetuated for eternity. You see, every soldier is assigned to a specific colony, and every colony has at its heart a gigantic mechanical weapon known as a Pharaonis. Each Pharaonis has a flame clock. These essentially represent the life force of a colony, and what's significant here is that they drain naturally over time. Should they run completely dry of life flames, all the soldiers linked to that specific Pharaonis/colony immediately die. However, this can be avoided. If you can kill the soldiers of the opposing nation, the energy from their own corresponding colony's flame clock is tallied up in yours, giving you more time to live and fight. And so, the true reason Keves and Agnes fight has absolutely nothing to do with any genuine ideological or historical differences or disputes between them. They simply fight to keep themselves alive, feeding their own clock in a kind of horrified reverence. The final key plot concept, or concepts, I've yet to explain are off-seeing and homecomings. I lump them together due to how closely connected they are. Homecomings, as previously mentioned, are ceremonies held for a soldier when they reach the end of their 10th year or term of life, in which select individuals play calming flute melodies for them as their life's essence fades away. Their true function will be revealed later, but for now, they are seen as an honour which every soldier aspires for. I find it honestly rather disturbing yet intriguing how, despite homecomings unabashedly acting as a sort of execution ceremony, the people of this world have been so utterly brainwashed that they crave this. It just goes to show how successful a certain group's propaganda has been. An interesting analysis of this is that, perhaps only subconsciously, the reason the soldiers want it so much is that the homecoming ceremony will mark an end to their miserable existence, even if nobody is brave enough to acknowledge it. Off-seeing involves soldiers performing the same task of playing somber flute melodies in honour of the dead, but under a different context. These have less of a precise, legitimate function than homecomings, and instead merely act as a symbolic way of mourning all the lives lost after a given battle. The imagery of the aftermath of an Ionian battle, of a sea of corpses overseen by two towering steel giants, as somber flute melodies play and motes of light ascend into the skies, is something that has struck with me since the very first time I played this game. It's vivid and visceral in a way I've seen few pieces of art be able to achieve, and it truly strikes a chord with me. We're introduced to our three main characters on the Kavezi side of this conflict: Noah, Uni, and Lanz. Immediately, Noah is portrayed as someone who, unlike most others, actually dares to question the state of the world, harbouring underlying suspicions that endless fighting can't be all there is to life. He's quiet, thoughtful, reserved, and sensitive, often lost inside his own thoughts. It's a stark contrast from our previous two protagonists. But a type of character that I think works really well for this premise. He almost acts like an audience surrogate in a way, someone who is able to see how wrong Ionios truly is, perhaps helping the player not to feel totally alienated in their own views of this world. He's an off-seer, someone who truly understands the value of life and does all he can to honour it, which admittedly isn't much in the grand scheme of things, since this is a world where life inherently is given no meaning. Uni and Lanz are characters I, at least at this point, have less to say about, but what I will say is I really like what we are shown of Lanz's arc here, and everything to do with Yoren. And Uni is... well, Uni's awesome. She's a fantastic inclusion, if only to act as a source of comedic relief at this point.
Oh, bollocks!
Whenever things get too depressing. However, I also really like her story, which we will get to later. After their initial battle against Colony Sigma, the Keves troops, including our trio, are sent to investigate a mysterious target whose true identity is kept a secret. During the skirmish, they discover a man who has somehow aged above the seeming 20-year limit, but not before coming in contact with another trio of soldiers from Agnes, the opposing nation, and the other side to our main party. I really love how our cast is structured here, how it's divided exactly half and half between the two countries, with each of the party having its own protagonist, Noah and Mia respectively. Each character also has a corresponding pair on the other side, with which they are given the most screen time, and forms the other half of their respective Ouroboros, but more on that later. After they briefly duke it out, a mysterious enemy of gargantuan proportions arrives, who we later come to know as the Mobius DJ. I want to gush about their portrayal here for a minute. Everything about them in this first scene is so well done. I love that they somehow strike a perfect middle ground between being slightly goofy but also genuinely threatening. The way they point towards the Ouroboros stone and sidestep comedically towards it, and jokingly hand out key pieces of information as if it doesn't matter, is incredibly entertaining. Overall, DJ has a theatrical flair which perfectly encapsulates Mobius as an entire group, which is why I think they're easily the most appropriate individual Mobius for us to come up against first. They set the stage, as it were, for what this story's antagonists are going to be like. The theatrical energy Mobius gives off is one which I believe was briefly attempted by Malos in Xenoblade 2, but it's just on another level here, and I really do love it, to be honest. I may have my issues with the antagonist of this game, which I will get onto much later, but this initial encounter with and characterization of them is perfect in my eyes. This last part isn't really relevant, but I also got to give props to simply how just cool these designs are. I mean, they cooked! To continue with the events of the story, the entity begins doing battle with our heroes, and they are facing a grave loss, but not before Van Damme activates a mysterious stone which does... this. I'm actually just going to let this scene play out in full, because it's genuinely so good.
Take
Is it mine? Huh? How are you inside me? Inside? Hold on. Are we?
I want to praise the sequences which play out whenever two characters first interlink in this game, where we get to see a visualization of their memories and headspace. It's a genuinely awesome piece of imagery that, again, I'd be hard pressed to forget anytime soon. They also act as really clever little moments of foreshadowing to the more extensive character backstory reveals we'll be seeing later in the story, which is always appreciated. The fact that each character can see their partner's mind space in this way and actually comment on it is another really novel concept which works really well and that I love. There's a sense that each member of an Ouroboros pair is no longer one individual consciousness but a wider, unified whole which is shared with another. It makes sense then that no matter how corny it may sound, the best way to overcome the challenge posed by Aionios is to cease to be separated in this way and work together, the very antithesis of everything this perverted world embodies. And that, in my opinion, is what Ouroboros represent. With Noah and Mio transformed into their Ouroboros, they are able to fend off DJ, who marks them as an enemy of the world before taking his leave. We get a beautiful moment where the two of them see off Van Damme together, but not before he imparts on them their true mission: reach Sword March and, in doing so, discover the identity of the true enemy. Now our 6 soldiers are freed from the bondage of the Flame Clock, and so don't have to kill to survive, yet the 10-year limit still remains. And nowhere is this restriction more evident than in the Agnian Trio's protagonist, Mio. She is a year older than the others, and so has a mere 3 months left till her time will run out. I think this serves as a really clever plot device to give their quest a sense of urgency, as the underlying hope that, should they reach Sword March within those 3 months, some way of escaping this affliction can be discovered. However, as I've seen other people in the community object to, I can certainly understand the criticism that this has the unfortunate side effect of implanting an unintended sense of guilt in the player should they choose to do side content or stray from the main path. Ultimately, I don't see this as much of a problem as some people make it out to be. Maybe I'm just heartless, but it rarely even occurred to me that Mio's time should have been running out whenever I wasn't progressing the main story. But hey, that's just me. Our 2 trios decide to part ways and return to their respective colonies for now, but they soon learn this isn't going to be possible, with Mobius having made all the world their enemies due to their becoming Ouroboros. A small criticism I'll make here is that I believe it's incredibly unlikely our gang will be able to be as successful as they are in the game if the entire army's forces on both sides was mobilized to hunt them down. But then again, a story in which our heroes are immediately gunned down by some random Agnian Levnesses wouldn't be a very entertaining one. This is certainly a nitpick, but perhaps it would make slightly more sense if Mobius purposefully didn't make the entire world their enemy. This would be to simply give themselves more enjoyment fending off Ouroboros themselves. After all, living for the thrill of a fight like this is certainly something that characterizes Mobius, and genuine excitement can't take place unless there's some degree of risk for them. With no other option left to them, our characters are forced to reconnect with one another and introduce themselves. I've seen a lot of people dislike Lance and Tyon's characterization in this scene due to their stubborn, rude demeanours, but personally I completely disagree with this take. I actually really love how some of the characters begin as deeply mistrusting, completely brainwashed by the propaganda they've been fed. Not only is it completely believable, but it also allows for more dramatic character development to take place as they learn to move past their prejudices and see the other side for what it truly is, no different to their own. Noah and Mio share a heartfelt chat by the campfire regarding deep topics like the meaning of life, the legacy they leave behind when they're gone, and how to make the most of their limited time in such a restrictive world. One of my favourite things about this story is how many moments we get like this, where we get to see the characters just sitting down, talking about how they're feeling completely earnestly for no reason other than that they're people. It sounds silly, but just letting them do this from time to time, just letting them have conversations that don't assist in moving the plot forward, makes our party feel so much more like real individuals who could actually exist, and I adore it. It's so refreshing. Something different this game does to its predecessors is the order in which you gather the party members, in that there is none. We get all 6, well technically 3 new ones, but you know what I mean, at once following this scene. In the previous titles, you would steadily build up your team over time, which was cool in that it provided a nice sense of progression. However, I can see the benefits to doing it like they did in this story too. Having all our party from the get-go allows for more character interactions than we would have gotten otherwise, which is a huge bonus since this particular cast is so incredibly entertaining. Overall, I'm in favour of it, and it's nice to see Monolith brave enough to take risks and spice things up like this. And with that, Chapter 1 and the first segment of this video is complete.